This is Javon Taylor, and I'll be presenting my 2022 Capstone Project on the equity and enrollment management of first-generation college experience. The project explores the origins and purposes of historically marginalized college populations and the transformation of institutional enrollment criteria designed to protect social privilege. Further, the research explores how marginalized students' enrollment practices impact or diminish identity development through a dissociative experience. More specifically, when first-generation college students' readiness is inept, it minimizes their success, retention, and adversely impacts their overall college development. The aim also in this presentation is to examine enrollment practices in the context of college preparedness, selective college enrollment transitions, marginalized student dissociative identity development, and college enrollment success approaches. The presentation will include research on higher education inequity fostered by privilege and oppression theory, identity development challenges discussed in the racial cultural identity development, empowerment, and the cultural mismatch theories. Lastly, enrollment and inclusion equity rooted in critical race theory, all of which using a transformative and charismatic leadership to answer the research questions and provide recommendations on why do past and present enrollment practices disadvantage first-generation students? How does privilege and oppression impact first-generation identity development? How does first-generation dissociative experiences impact their college success? And is critical race theory a viable approach to addressing inequities in college enrollment? Let's begin with the dual education concept, historically establishing marginalization in academia. The dual education system established centered on developing a vigorous manual labor force underpinning a professional industrial development of the elite educated. It constructed a vocational and scholastic education system which identified groups by social class that determined their educational pedagogy. Further, Gordon Schultz outlined the foundation for marginalized education is groups are rooted in a dual education system and is perpetuated into the 20th century. The purpose for this in early education was to ensure elite student college preparedness, perpetuate inept college readiness for lower ranked classes, and to preserve the privilege and prestige of the American social hierarchy. The dual education concept gave way to additional disadvantages for marginalized student groups. As Lehman references, one of the criteria adaptations was the 1938 installation of the SAT to act as the great sorter of marginalized students' admissions access to prestigious colleges. The collegiate dual enrollment construction morphed into the primary and secondary private and public education systems after the 1958 transition to a college tier rank structure creation. This further disadvantaged oppressed groups' enrollment into top-tier prestigious institutions. This exclusion is a virulent form of social injustice that was predicated on structures of networking and power that allowed elitism to migrate college admissions. It is noted by Helms that individual identities are formed through social experiences coupled with a formal education, which contributes to a limited first generation students' understanding of their American self and perceived social role. Moreover, it is the dissociative acculturation experience that first generations are forced to face that drives them to maintain their cultural identity's positive distinctiveness, according to Schultz. Various identity development theories demonstrate and articulate the individual identity evolution. Su and Su's 5 stages of racial cultural identity development, the RACID, which describes marginalized first generation groups oppressed by their experiences of struggling to understand themselves in terms of their own culture, the dominant American culture, and the oppressive relationship between the two, contributes to the dissociative college experience. Moreover, first generation generally teeter-totter between stages 3, resistance and immersion, and 4, introspective identity development, which contributes to their turbulent college experience. The next is the empowerment theory, which delineates social acculturation, assimilation, and how groups struggle with liberating and power acquisition. Moreover, it indicates that during the European conquering of America, acculturation was a requirement which oppressive groups struggled with while striving for identity liberation and empowerment. More specifically, the depravity of their power is rooted in their own identity and inability to assimilate fully because they struggle with embracing a hierarchy that is impossible to dismantle because they cannot change their race, gender, or heritage. Other groups were successful in assimilating to the United States by simply shedding their past cultural identities and accepting the American one. The last concept centers on Stevens's cultural mismatch theory. This argues that as first generation students, college's cultural experience is viewed in terms of independence, that is, them paving their own way, which renders academic tasks sometimes very difficult, versus the continuing generation students experiencing the university's culture in terms of interdependence, that is, being a part of the community, eliminating the difficulty and the performance gaps without adverse consequences. In short, having parents that attended college helps social identity acculturation and expand social opportunities. This race is critical in theory and application, requiring a leveling of the college playing field, which is occurring in respects to the phrase Bell coined, the principle of interest convergence, that explains how dominant cultures will concede only when it benefits them, demonstrating the basic CRT tenets are currently present in enrollment practices, whether acknowledged or not, due to legal reverse discrimination cases. As well, Bonilla Silva's concept of storytelling and counter storytelling that denote colorblindness and neutrality must be challenged, signifying that first generation students' cultural identity laws is rooted in attempting to assimilate fully, meaning losing their cultural stories requires consistent pushback. A significant stride in winning the race came from Justice Ginsburg and Gutter B. Vollinger when her opinion stated that race based classification and admissions plans cannot be used forever, but they are necessary for the time being. This is a major stance for the courts attempting to mitigate equity in education. It provides validation for marginalized first generation students' right to equity in the political, economic, and more importantly, the educational system. All these recent transformations affirm the necessity for equity leadership implementation approaches. The transformational leadership method motivates and raises levels of consciousness, which encourages individuals to transcend self interest for the higher level needs of others. This leadership style, working in collaboration with a charismatic approach, provides an equitable balance for effective enrollment, inclusion, practices, and procedures. Charismatic leadership works because it ties individuals and self concepts into the organizational identity. In conclusion, where do we go from here? The project asked, why do past and present enrollment practices disadvantage first generation students? It's primarily due to the inequitable practices in the educational structure. It also asks, how does privilege and oppression impact first generation identity development? All three theories demonstrate how marginalized groups are restricted due to their struggles to acculturate and to assimilate. Next, it asks, how does first generation dissociative experiences impact their college success? The combination of social and cultural identity developments create conflict with independence versus interdependence college experiences. Lastly, it asks, is CRT, critical race theory, a viable approach to addressing inequities in the college enrollment? Critical race theory tenants strive to place all students equally at the starting line in their college admissions process. As a result of the project's research, the following recommendations are provided. First, create an educational leadership and institutional cultural approach focused on equitable inclusion and development. Next, recruit first generation students into first year experience courses with program success centered curriculums. Next, structure enrollment procedures that lead disadvantaged marginalized student populations into a 1+4 year bachelor's degree program during admissions, centering the first year on success structured programs, resources, and institutional inclusion. And lastly, increase the first generation students' college readiness through critical race theory development initiatives in their secondary through their post secondary educational curriculums.